Most winter camping gear isn't just overrated, it's actually dangerous. I know that sounds extreme, but after years of camping and testing gear in the Canadian Rockies in temperatures down to -40, I've seen how the wrong equipment can put people at risk. The biggest mistake? Trusting untested gear and believing the specs and features advertised by manufacturers. So today I'm taking 4 new pieces of cold weather gear and spending the night in below freezing temperatures to see which ones actually work and which ones are built on lies. I'm hoping they all perform well and provide amazing new options for cold weather camping, but I think that might be a little bit naive. So I also brought my tried and true trusted gear with me to act as a backup. The first item that I'm going to be testing is the Nortent Torv 7 sleeping pad. This pad only costs $119, has a pretty low weight of 737 grams, while still boasting an R value of 7, which is quite warm and should be capable of handling not only cold conditions, but winter conditions. Nortent claims that this pad is not only comfortable, but can provide year-round warmth. And it does that by using reflective insulation on the inside. So it has 4 layers of Mylar film that are suspended inside the pad, very similarly to the Nemo Tensor Extreme Conditions. What has me most excited is the comfort potential with this pad. The only winter rated pad that is at all comfortable is the new Sea to Summit Etherlite XR Pro, but this pad with its vertical baffles and slight dimpleness to the baffling pattern could be a very comfortable pad. It also uses a 3D construction with sidewalls, which in my experience leads to the pad sleeping a little bit wider than the ones that kind of taper towards the edges. So a lot going for this pad, and I'm really excited to test it out. There's 2 big questions with this pad. The first one being, is the insulation effectively implemented in order to help keep me warm? The second one is, does the size and thickness of this pad lead to a lot more heat loss, especially when you're dealing with cold air like we're going to tonight? In order to test the pad, I'm going to be doing an overnight warmth and comfort test. So as I'm sleeping on the pad over the course of the night, I'm going to be paying attention to whether I'm feeling any heat loss through the pad, as well as how comfortable I am. How many times am I waking up throughout the night in order to shift positions, or is my arm going numb and falling asleep? Just paying attention to those things to see how this pad does. As you can see, I am going to be sleeping on snow tonight, which is going to be sucking a lot of the heat through the pad from the bottom, and the air temperatures are forecasted to get down to -14 degrees Celsius, which is, I think, a very good temperature in order to test out this pad. My tried and true backup if the Torv 7 starts sleeping cold is the Thermrest X-Therm sleeping pad. I've used that pad down to -40 degrees Celsius. It's very warm, not very comfortable, but will get the job done in order to keep me warm and safe. The second item is the Neve Feathertail Quilt. It costs $300 US and weighs 867 grams on my scale and is -12 degrees Celsius comfort rated. The big claim by Neve is that this quilt is heavily overfilled and sleeps warmer than the advertised comfort rating, which is a pretty big claim. What has me excited about it is that Neve uses a really good draft reduction system. Basically, the tabs that you connect your pad strap to are a little bit up from the edge of the quilt, and that creates a thin layer of material that locks the quilt onto the sleeping pad and does a very good job at preventing drafts. I've used the same system with Neve's warmer rated quilt, and I found that it's very effective at reducing drafts and kind of takes the fiddly factor out of using a quilt. The Feathertail also has a really good draft collar here, as well as a cinch in order to lock the quilt around your neck and shoulders, which is also a very important thing when cold temperatures start to hit you. What has me excited is that I love quilts because I find I can shift positions underneath them a lot more easily. I get much better sleeps than using a sleeping bag, but I haven't really found a quilt that effectively keeps me warm down to -12 degrees Celsius. And I'm really excited for the Feathertail because I think it might be able to do that. In order to test the quilt, I'm going to do the same overnight test that I'm doing with the Torv 7 sleeping pad. I'm going to sleep underneath the quilt and really see whether I'm losing any heat from anywhere, basically. See whether there's any generic heat loss, as well as do a good toss and turn test to see whether I can open up any drafts and get some cold air coming in. My tried and true backup if the Feathertail doesn't sleep as warm as I hope is a synthetic quilt from Enlightened Equipment. I've used that in a layering system with quilts that are rated to a warmer temperature than this, and I was plenty warm down to about -30 degrees Celsius. So if I am feeling any sort of cold, I can throw that on top and I'm probably going to be warm enough. The third item is this down hoodie from Rockfront. It costs $85 and weighs 101 grams. The Rockfront claims that the hood with an appropriate quilt and sleeping pad will keep you warm down to -20 degrees Celsius. But the big thing that makes this down hood different than others is this synthetic tube that sticks off the front and goes around your face. It's made with ClimaShield, which is a synthetic material, and that has a couple cinches on it so you can create an effective tube. And what that tube does is a couple different things. The first one being that it creates a warm pocket of air around your face, so you're not having to put a really thick balaclava or something over your face and then dealing with that sort of uncomfortableness. What it also does is helps with really dry air. In the wintertime, the air gets quite dry, and that can be really uncomfortable to be breathing in and out. So with that pocket of warm air, it also holds on to more moisture, which makes breathing it in a lot easier. I've used a snorkel system with my winter sleeping bag, the Thermarest Polar Ranger, and I found it very effective. I just sleep a lot more comfortably and a lot warmer around my face. What has me excited about it is that it doesn't matter how warm your quilt is if your head is getting cold. And this snorkel system has the potential to be a way to keep your head warm when you're using a quilt in really cold conditions. And like I said, I love using quilts, so if this allows me to use a quilt effectively, then that's going to be great. In order to pair with my sleep system, the last 3 items that we talked about, I'm going to be wearing mesh base layers and then some fleece socks on my feet. And that's it. Nothing else on my head other than the snorkel, and then nothing else on my body as far as insulation goes. The 4th item I'm testing is the Durson X-Dome 1 Plus, which is my favorite tent, but I'm testing out the solid inner version. Up until now, I've been using just the mesh inner, which I've loved, but the solid inner claims to add warmth as well as decrease drafts and the potential for snowdrift and stuff to be getting blown inside the tent. The solid inner costs $20 more than the mesh inner and weighs 65 grams more. What has me really excited is the potential to boost the warmth of my entire sleeping area for only 65 grams. That's not a lot of weight in order to increase warmth, and I am excited about the potential to decrease the amount of things blowing inside my tent, because I've used the mesh version of the X-Dome in the desert, and I've had a lot of sand build up inside the tent, and in the wintertime, snow can get blown through mesh and then start building up on the inside of the tent as well. There's 2 questions that I want to answer with the solid inner. The first one being, how much warmth does it actually add? Because the mesh inner doesn't really add much warmth at all. My second question is, how much frost builds up on the inside of the solid inner? Because I'm breathing all night inside the tent, and normally with the mesh inner, that condensation, that frost would build up on the fly, and it's really easy to kind of shake out and get out of my tent system in the morning. Whereas if a lot of frost builds up on the inside of the solid, then that will probably just turn into snowballs inside the tent, and they're a little bit harder to get rid of. In order to test the solid inner, I'm going to be doing a few different things. I brought 2 Bluetooth thermometers. I'm going to be having one outside the tent and one inside the tent, and I'm going to track what the temperature is with both over the course of the night and see what the difference is. There's not a lot of wind tonight, unfortunately, so I'm not going to really be able to see how much draft prevention and how much the solid inner prevents things blowing in, but I am going to see how much frost builds up on the inside and maybe pay attention a little bit as best I can to how much there might be drafts getting reduced, because there's a tiny little bit of wind. Before it gets too dark, I'm going to take advantage of the little bit of light that's left. The temperature right now is 4.8 degrees Celsius, so it should be dropping pretty quickly as the sun goes down behind the mountains. Wish me luck tonight. As soon as I'm done dinner, I'm going to hop into my sleep system, start the testing, and then we'll touch base in the morning. Good morning. Temperatures last night got down well below the forecast. The thermometer outside the tent recorded minus 20 degrees Celsius, and that led to some gear failures. So even though I don't want to, let's get out my sleep system, get out of the tent, and we'll talk about it. Let's start off with the tent, because I was really curious to see whether a solid inner could increase the temperature inside of a tent by a significant margin. Like I mentioned, the overnight low last night got down to minus 20 degrees Celsius, but when I went to bed, it was only about minus 8 outside the tent. But at that point in time, the difference between the temperature on the outside and the inside was at its greatest. When it was minus 8 degrees Celsius outside the tent, it was actually freezing, 0 degrees Celsius inside the tent. So there's an 8-degree difference between the outside and the inside. And that kind of blew my mind. So I was curious to see how is that going to progress over the course of the night as the temperatures got lower. And what happened was interesting. As the temperatures worked their way down to that minus 20 degrees Celsius range, the differential between the outside temperature and the inside temperature actually shrank. So when it was minus 20 degrees outside the tent, it was actually minus 15 degrees inside the tent. So a 5-degree difference. That 5-degree difference doesn't seem like a lot, but it was actually pretty significant last night for me because it's what kept me from freezing. If it was minus 20 inside the tent, I would have been very, very cold and having to implement basically all of my backup measures. As far as frost on the inner of the tent, there was a bit, but not as much as I feared. And that's great because dealing with snow that accumulates inside the inner is a big pain in the butt. I know I was producing a lot of condensation, so I think what's happening is this inner material that they're using is really breathable. So my moisture is actually leaving the inside of the tent and then accumulating on the inside of the fly, which is actually where I want it because when I scrunch up my tent and then kind of shake it out, all of that snow that's on the inside of the fly just falls to the ground and I don't have to deal with it. So overall, the X-Zone passed basically both of the tests that I put it through. It slept warmer on the inside than the outside, and it did accumulate a ton of frost on the inners. So what that means is I'm gonna probably be using the solid inner on the X-Zone for all my winter trips this year, just to get that extra little bit of warmth boost for only 65 grams. Let's jump into the sleep system now, because that is where I encountered a failure even before temperatures got down to the -12 forecasted temperature. For the snorkel, there's 3 questions I was trying to answer. The first one being whether I was claustrophobic inside it, because it is a very enclosed system and it's all around your face. For me, I didn't find it claustrophobic, but I'm used to this kind of system because of winter camping with my Thermarest Polar Ranger, and I had it fully cinched up all around my face, and I felt fine. I think a big part of that is how this performs from a warmth perspective. I stayed toasty warm all the way down to -20 degrees Celsius. I didn't need to put on my toque or my neck warmer at all, which was awesome. The reason this hood is so warm is because it uses a box baffle construction with a lot of really warm down inside of it. And the snorkel makes a big difference as well. So because I had this cinched up, I was just trapping a lot of warm air around my face instead of that warm air being projected out into the world and then being replaced by cold air that would then cool me off. And because the snorkel is made with synthetic material, it didn't absorb all the moisture that I was breathing and then become really, really wet. Having the snorkel had a side benefit as well in that there wasn't as much moisture that accumulated around my shoulders and body. When I don't use a snorkel in cold temperatures, I find that a lot of the moisture that I'm breathing out accumulates around my shoulders and neck and starts to compromise my top insulation. So the hood passed the warmth test, and I think it could actually go below the advertised -20. The third thing that I was testing was finickiness, because there's a lot of straps. There's these straps that go into your armpits. There's the 2 straps for the snorkel system. I just thought that maybe I'd start getting tangled up and it'd be difficult to use. And to a degree, it is a little bit finicky, especially with these armpit straps. They weren't as bad as I thought, but still a bit of a pain, especially if you want to add layers over the course of the night. And I think for some people, the finickiness would probably actually be a deal breaker. That being said, there's not really anything else on the market that's going to be accomplishing what this did. And there's only really one tweak that I'd make, and that's to add a cinch at the back. Yes, another cinch in order to kind of make it cinch around your forehead in order to lock it in place around your head. I think if you had that, you might not even need these armpit straps. So another pass with the Rockfront snorkel. If you're interested in any of the gear that I'm talking about today, I'll have links down in the video description so you can go check it out, as well as all the backup gear that I'm using on this trip. For the Quilt, there's 2 things that I was testing. The first one was drafts, and in order to test this out, as I went to bed, I tossed and turned underneath it to see if I could create some drafts. And then over the course of that, I did shift positions back and forth a little bit, and I was wary of whether I was creating drafts when I did that, and trying to feel for any cold spots. And good news on the draft front, I didn't experience any drafts at all. This system, where you have a little bit of material kind of hanging down from where the pad straps are, just works so well and makes it so that there's no drafts coming in the side. That being said, I do think there is a weak point, and that's kind of around the head here, in between this top strap point and the top of the quilt. I think if they moved both straps up just a little bit and then closed up the foot box a little bit, they'd have basically an airtight system. There'd be no drafts coming in at all. I think their current design is great for warmer temperatures, but as you get colder, I think you do need to be closing the foot box up a little bit and then really making sure that there's no drafts around your neck and shoulder area. As far as warmth goes, this one's interesting because I was warm up until the point where it hit -12 degrees Celsius inside the tent. And that's what Neve advertises this quilt as being able to handle, but they also say that it should get you down below those temperatures. I was just in mesh base layers, which isn't really the standard for testing quilts and sleeping bags. Most of the time, for the ASTM standard at least, they're wearing a fleece kind of mid layer. And that's what I had to put on in order to get down to about the -15 that it ended up inside the tent when it got its coldest. So if you're wearing thin base layers and then fleece mid layers, you can push this quilt down below -12, but you have to be wary of that. I probably wouldn't take it down below -12 intentionally. Something to keep in mind is that last night humidity was very high as well. It was 80% outside the tent, which is quite high and is leading to a lot of moisture accumulation. And I think some of that did get into the down of the quilt and probably compromised the down a little bit. If it was drier conditions, I probably actually would have slept even warmer inside this quilt. So something to keep in mind. And that brings us to the Torv sleeping pad. If you remember, this pad has an advertised R value of 7. That's how warm this pad is based on laboratory testing. And last night, there's 2 things that I was testing with this pad. The first one being comfort. I was really excited for this vertical, slightly dimpled baffling system, and it did sleep fairly comfortable. That is for the amount of time that I actually got to sleep on this pad, because this is the item that ended up failing on me last night before it even got very cold. I tried sleeping on this pad for about 2 hours, but by 10 p.m. when temperatures inside the tent were -6, I was way too cold and I actually had to switch out this pad for my X-Therm. And I'm so glad I brought the X-Therm, because as soon as I switched out the pads, I noticed an immediate difference. The X-Therm was radiating heat back to me and my overall system became insanely warmer. I was losing so much heat that I don't think I could have survived spending the night on this pad. I would have gotten colder and colder, and I think I would have actually ended up hypothermic and potentially in a really dangerous situation. So this is one of those items where it's not only overhyped, but it's actually a dangerous product. And while Nortent is to blame a little bit in this, I really think the biggest culprit is the R-value testing system. They're testing pads in room temperature conditions using a cold plate and a hot plate, and then they measure how much energy it takes to keep that hot plate warm. So the better the sleeping pad insulates, the less energy it takes to keep that hot plate warm as the cold plate sucks heat out of it. And while this test is great for testing how effective a pad might be at keeping you warm from the ground, it doesn't take air temperature into account really at all, because the testing is happening at room temperature, about 20 degrees Celsius. So when you get modern pads that are really big, they're thick, and have a lot of exposure to the air around them, you're having pads to sleep a lot colder than their R value. So 3 successes and 1 really big failure. I think the item that has me most excited is probably the Neve Feathertail quilt. I just love the idea of being able to use a quilt down to about -12. If I can do that, then I'll be a happy camper. If you're interested in my full winter camping gear list, go check out this video right up here. I go over everything that I use in order to stay warm down to -40 in the Canadian Rockies.